Remember the concept of God's heavenly staff team, the Divine Council, or the sons of God. In the Hebrew scriptures, we're told that some of these rebelled too.
God allotted the nations to the members of his divine council. The Bible says this is why the ancient nations worshipped other gods. God decided to let the members of his divine council govern the other nations in response to humanity's rebellion at Babel.
That Jesus sees himself stepping into this drama between this battle of two realms. And that explains all of his exorcisms and why that was such a big deal to him.
Welcome to another episode of Ring Them Bells, where we're rediscovering the Bible on its own terms. As always, I just want to take a second and ask you to subscribe. It means so much for this channel for you to take a quick second. Please like, please share, please subscribe. It helps us so much get the good news out about what Jesus has done for this world.
I think that when we read Revelation 17 and 18, and we get all this Babylon stuff, we get all the nations, the many waters, the spiritual adultery, blah, 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 the great whore, and all this stuff. Again, that looks just weird. It looks abstract. It looks like none of these things have any relationship to each other at all, but they all do, because there are ways of describing allegiance to other gods instead of Yahweh. There are ways of describing the Deuteronomy 32 rebellion, all this stuff. I want you to be thinking the rest of the time how Psalm 82 links the judgment of the gods over the nations with not only these themes, but also the whole theme of injustice, social, economic injustice, just the chaos that the gods sow in the nations. Remember Psalm 82, where what is God so angry at the gods for? Now, he has allotted the gods to the other nations. He has abandoned the nations because he's judging them for the whole Tower of Babel episode. He's fragmented them through the languages. We all know the Tower of Babel story, okay? What we miss is the allotment of the gods to the nations and the nations to these other gods. If you've read Unseen Realm, this is old hat by now. Deuteronomy 4:19 through 20, Deuteronomy 17:1 through 3, Deuteronomy 29:23 through 26. You get this allotment language of the host of heaven. The host of heaven are called Elohim in these passages. They are called gods, and these gods have been allotted to the nations. God has taken Israel. This is the language of Deuteronomy 4:19 and 20. He has taken Israel to be his own, and he has judged the other ones. You get to Deuteronomy 32, when the Most High divides up the nations, he divides them up according to the number of the sons of God. Israel is Yahweh's own portion. And again, it's a judgment. And so what happens next in the biblical story is that God says, okay, we're done now. You don't get to set up your own religious system where you build a ziggurat. It's part of a temple complex. And then I come to you and say, what do you want? Okay, you're doing exactly the opposite I told you to do. We repeated the Edenic mandate. You're supposed to disperse all over the earth and reclaim it for me. We're here to try to kickstart Eden again, folks. And you don't seem to get it. Fine. Let's see if you get this.
Remember the concept of God's heavenly staff team, the Divine Council, or the sons of God. In the Hebrew scriptures, we're told that some of these rebelled too.
When did that happen?
Multiple times, actually. After the snake comes the rebellion of the sons of God in Genesis 6. We're told that they have sex with women who then give birth to violent warrior giants.
Oh, right. The Nephilim. These are probably the strangest characters in the whole Bible.
Well, strange from your point of view. But ancient readers knew exactly what was going on. The ancient kingdoms around Israel claimed to be founded and protected by giant warrior kings who were part human, part God, and filled with divine wisdom.
Ah, I see. So the biblical authors are saying, hey, those warrior kings, they shouldn't be honored.
Right. In this story, they're portrayed as human rebels who are captive to spiritual evil, spreading their violence in God.
When we look out at a violent government, here in our modern worldview, we just think like, oh, stupid humans, bad policy. And with the biblical authors, what Paul the Apostle wants us to see, and this isn't just Paul's idea, this goes all the way back to Genesis 6, is to say, nah, man, there's two realms overlapping here. And there are dark powers at work that are trying to destroy God's good world. This was their way. It was their framework for talking about dark spiritual powers that are behind the violent empires of our world. Genesis 3:15, when God exiles the humans, what he promises is that a seed will come from the woman who will crush the head of the snake. And so what you're looking for is a human who won't give in to the deception of the snake, but rather who will overcome the snake. The whole point is this leading us to Jesus. As he is the human in whom divine and human, image of God, image of man, heaven and earth meet together in one person. And so the stories about him being tested in the wilderness is about, he is the anti-Cain. And he's the anti-Nephilim, and he defeats the tester in the wilderness, and then he's going to go on to do everything he's going to do. But the point is that Jesus sees himself stepping into this drama between this battle of two realms, and that explains all of his exorcisms and why that was such a big deal to him. That used to just strike me as kind of cool, but also weird about Jesus, is that exorcism was such a big deal for him. But if you fit him into this story with this view of the cosmos from Genesis 1, it makes perfect sense.
Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top reaches to the heavens. And Yahweh said, Come, let us go down and confuse their language there, so that they will not understand each other's language. Therefore, its name was called Babel.
Now this is a really familiar story, but less familiar is how the story is told in Deuteronomy.
When the Most High apportioned the nations, at his dividing up the sons of humankind, he fixed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. For Yahweh's portion was his people, Jacob the share of his inheritance.
When was humanity divided into nations? That was at Babel. God allotted the nations to the members of his divine council. The Bible says this is why the ancient nations worshipped other gods. God decided to let the members of his divine council govern the other nations in response to humanity's rebellion at Babel.
But the gods of the nations failed to rule justly. God chastises them in Psalm 82.
God stands in the divine assembly. He administers judgment in the midst of the gods. How long will you judge unjustly and show favoritism to the wicked?
Then God pronounces a judgment on them.
I have said, you are gods and sons of the Most High, all of you. However, you will die like men, and you will fall like one of the princes.
The gods will be judged, punished, and will die. It's startling to read these things. God is so angry with his corrupt heavenly sons that he condemns them. Some passages in the prophets place the fulfillment of this punishment in the end times at the day of the Lord.
For the anger of Yahweh is against all the nations, and his wrath is against all their host. All the host of heaven shall rot. All their host shall wither. On that day, Yahweh will punish the host of heaven in heaven, and the kings of the earth on the earth.
Do we realize how dramatic the judgment at Babel really was? When it was over, God had no relationship with humanity. But God still wanted a family, and he already had a plan to fix that problem. He'd begin with one man named Abraham.
And then next, I'm going to go call this dude Abraham, and his wife, and I'm going to raise up through them a new Adam, a new humanity, a new people for me. because that's why I started Eden. I want a human family. You don't seem willing, so long. Okay, now we're going to start it again. We're going to do it again. And Abraham and Sarah are perfect because she cannot have children. This is wonderful, because when I enable her to have a child, no one on the face of the earth is going to be able to deny that the only reason this people exists, Israel, is because of a supernatural act on my behalf. I get the credit. Okay, I'm the creator. Nobody else is. And so this is what God does. Now, when he does it, he makes Abram a promise in Genesis 12, chapter right after Babel, and says, now look, it's going to be, I'm going to promise you all sorts of things. I'm going to give you a land. I'm going to multiply you. You're going to be like the stars. And, and we've had, David Burnett on in the past talking about the star language. It's not just quantity. It refers to a quality that this is the people who are going to be with me in a new Eden. It's the language of glorification. It's not just quantity, but quality. But you know what? Those nations that I just divorced, we're not forgetting them, because one day, just like I told Eve that one day she's going to have a human child, there's going to be a human being that extends from her lineage who will be born, who will undo the effects of this disaster that happened in the Garden of Eden. So just like I told her that, I'm going to tell you something. One of your seed is going to be the key, going to be the conduit through which all of these other nations are going to be brought back into the family. I will have my people from them. Okay, I'm not going to abandon them permanently. They're on the shelf now, but I'm going to use you to bring them back, to bring the nations back. And this is the Old Testament story. Now, what happens is that the gods who are appointed over these other nations, and since God is still interested in them, I mean, if you're a member of some other nation in Old Testament times, there's no rule against you joining Israel, except for one. You must abandon other gods. You must turn your back on all other gods. You must confess that Yahweh is the God of all gods, and that he has entered into a covenant relationship with these people known as Israel. And when I join them, I will worship no other. I will trust no other. I will presume that no other deity will, rescue me from Sheol. I will presume that he is the God of all gods, and that only he is capable of rescuing me from death, ultimately. This is what you must believe, and there's no rule against anybody believing it. We know that there are pagans and Gentiles in the Old Testament who come over, they switch sides. There's no barrier to that other than turning their backs on their gods. So, this is what's going on. Well, the gods of the nations, their strategy becomes, okay, well, we'll just seduce Yahweh's people into abandoning him. We're going to turn them into idolaters. And the people under our charge, we're going to enslave them. We're going to make them dependent on us. We're going to sow so much chaos in their lives. We're going to sow so much fear in their lives that they're going to be so paralyzed with fear that they wouldn't think of leaving us, because we'll retaliate. We'll destroy them. It's a fear-based, power-based, abuse-based, chaos-based system. And if you read Psalm 82, this is what you get in verses 2 through 5. This is what they're doing, and this is why God is angry. So I want you to be thinking about all that as a background, because when you head into the rest of Revelation 17 and 18, there are a number of places where it describes the economic, injustice. And what I mean by that is ways that those who hold power enslave people.
often makes mention of beings that he calls the principalities and powers. And we in the modern Western world have real trouble getting our heads around what he might mean by this, because in some passages it looks as if he's referring quite unambiguously to earthly rulers, to Caesar, to Pontius Pilate, to the Herodian faction, to whoever happens to be in charge in any given city or province, or indeed in the empire as a whole. But in other passages he talks about the principalities and powers in a way which seems to make it clear that he's talking about what we would call spiritual powers, who are not the same thing as the actual rulers, the human beings who are in charge politically and socially and so on. How do we put these together? One of the things we have to realize is that for Paul, first, the Creator God wanted his world to be wisely ordered, and he wanted that to happen through wise, obedient human beings. So in other words, from the Jewish point of view and the early Christian point of view, the Creator God wants good, appropriate, wise government. And so Paul says in Romans 13, everyone should obey the rulers and authorities. And if they ask for taxes, you should pay them, and so on. Of course, one of the things that's going on there is that he's saying the rulers and authorities, by the way, are not themselves divine, but they are responsible to the one true God, which actually is to pull the Roman emperor and the people who vaunt his power and prestige right down from their particular throne and say, no, they are just humans, but they are doing a God-given job. So on the one hand, you've got the actual rulers, and Paul is going to hold them to account, and we can see him doing that in Acts. But then you've got these other beings, for instance, in Colossians 2, when he says that on the cross, Jesus disarmed the principalities and powers and the rulers and authorities and made a public example of them, triumphing over them in the cross. What on earth does he mean? Because to the naked eye, it looked as though the principalities and powers were celebrating a triumph over Jesus, not that he was celebrating a triumph over them. It seems that Paul, having set out in Colossians 1 a vision of the principalities and powers themselves as being part of the strange world order that the Creator God has established, that the powers have gone into rebellion, they have revolted, they are doing their own thing, and this links up with some of the biblical language about the fall of Satan and all of that. And so Paul says that what happens on the cross is it may look as if they're celebrating a triumph over Jesus, but in fact this, strangely, the death of the Messiah, of the world's true Lord, of the Son of God, this cruel, shameful death on the cross is the means by which their power is broken. Because the last thing that they can do is to kill somebody. After that, there's nothing more they can do. And God is the Creator who is going to give life beyond death, and therefore to reveal that what happened on the cross was Jesus somehow bearing and exhausting the worst that the rulers and authorities, the principalities and powers can do.
On this, you go to Revelation 17, 1 through 2, come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters. With the kings of the earth, they have committed sexual immorality. Okay, so they hold the power brokers in their hands, okay? You get to Revelation 18, 2 and 3. That's Revelation 17. Here's Revelation 18, 2 and 3. Let's just go to verse 1. Then after this I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority. The earth was made bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. For all nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. And the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth. They're now all of a sudden we throw in the merchants. Again, the people who will use wealth to victimize and enslave others, okay? The merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. So there we add the economic element. You keep reading in chapter 18, you get to verse 5. We see it again. For her sins, Babylon's sins are heaped and God her iniquity, her herself and back others. Repay her deeds, mix a double portion for her in the cup she mixed. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her like a measure of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen, I am no widow. The mourning I shall never see. M-O-U-R. She's not going to see disaster. For this reason, her plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine. She will be burned up with fire, for mighty is the Lord God who has judged her. You go down a little bit further. You get verses 10 through 17. Look at how Babylon is described. Alas, you great city, you mighty city Babylon, for in a single hour your judgment has come. And the merchants, there they are again, of the earth, weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore, cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, all kinds of scented wood. There's just a long grocery list of spices. This is the economic center because Babylon was the dominant world empire. Okay, let me just be real simple. It's like Thomas Jefferson said. Okay, the more that the government gives you, the more it can take away. Okay, when you are under its authority, when you are dependent on it, it will strangle you. You have now given it the power to crush you and to control you and manipulate you. This is what, we live in America, but we're still fond of saying, things like, and it's true. When is the last time government surrendered power? It doesn't.
You're enjoying this series. It is blowing my mind, and I'm so grateful to be able to share this information with you. I'm going to take a second and ask you to subscribe. This is something really small for you, but it means a lot for the message and scope of this channel. If you can slap that like button, share this content out, make sure you're subscribed, turn on the alerts. All these little things help us get the message out about the good news about what God has done for this world. So thank you for subscribing. Let's get back to the message.
And this is why economic power and other kinds of manipulative power are used in the Bible, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and here in Revelation. Revelation picks up all these themes. I'm reading the book of Revelation, reading Revelation 18. So this is why these things are referenced, because when a system of power owns you, you're trapped. Okay, you're going to suffer greatly to ever get out from under it. It will not allow it. It will not tolerate you excusing yourself from the arrangement. It owns you. And it's an abuse of power. It's an opportunity for chaos. It's an opportunity to exploit and destroy. And this is why the book of Revelation casts Babel in these economic terms, and that goes right back to Psalm 82. It goes right back there.
So Revelation, you're showing us that it's not just a critique of the Roman Empire, but it's a critique of empire, of evil empires, and who is the evil that is ultimately behind them. So with seeing Revelation as a critique against empire, I'd like to watch a clip from N.T. Wright that may be able to help us trace this rhythm of evil empire and where it needs critique today. Shall we?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay.
The text I'm going to walk you through, the text that's full of hope for our confused world, comes from the letter to the Colossians, which it must have sounded, this letter to the Colossians must have sounded ridiculous, grandiose, outrageous when it was first written, just as much as it does to many people today. Colossae was a small town inland from Ephesus on the western coast of Turkey, and this letter was written more or less when the whole known world was agog with news of the new bright young leader who was taking over the world's sole superpower. Sound familiar? The old ruler had been increasingly unpopular. Most people in the Roman Empire were glad to see the back of him. They'd been excited at the prospect of his successor, who was a charismatic younger man, a hero to the armies that he'd led into battle, a cultured man who could sing and act and charm the birds out of the trees with the way he spoke. Many people in the world of ancient Rome and its satellites all around the Mediterranean were excited to think of this bright young man taking the helm of the most powerful nation on earth. I am eager to say that there are no parallels between this and your new situation, because the name of the new emperor who succeeded the old doddery Claudius was, of course, Nero. And just in case you might forget the importance of a new emperor, the Roman Empire had ways of reminding you. In that pre-print, pre-electronic media world, coins were the main mass media. And so they printed the head of famous people like emperors on their coins. I think we still do that in my country and yours. And they put little titles around: Son of God, Lord of the World, or near equivalent, and the famous imperial peace and security. Now, it might be tempting to think, well, we don't do anything like that, except of course we do, not only on our coins, but on your dollar bill.
Conflicts and ongoing military tensions mean that countries from nearly every corner of the planet are looking to increase their arsenals. And who, as the world's largest arms exporter, is right in the middle of it all? It's the United States. The U.S. government contributes billions to foreign military financing. Roughly $5.7 billion is planned for 2017. Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Pakistan, and Iraq are the top recipients of this U.S. largesse.
It spends more money on its military than the next 10 countries combined. And it's been this way for a long time. Congress not only approved $813 billion in military spending, but it also gave President Biden an additional $45 billion for military spending that he didn't even ask for. To put that in perspective, $45 billion is more than double the amount of money needed to end homelessness in the United States. And that's because military spending is one of the few things that tends to be bipartisan, meaning both Republicans and Democrats in Congress generally are cool with this massive spending. The military-industrial complex increases the incentives for war.
So let's you've said, and rightly so, the way God wages war in the world is through non-violence. God reigns through the cross and not through the sword. How does this aspect of the gospel shape our critique of the United States of America and other empires?
Man, that's a loaded question.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, where do I even begin? At the end of that video, I believe it was, he mentioned the military-industrial complex. Now, he didn't invent that out of thin air. He's not the first to say that. It was actually President Eisenhower who made that comment at the eve of his presidency, at the end of his term, I believe. And the idea basically is that military becomes business, and it's a complicated relationship that's so intertwined that in other words, you need war to have business. You need to have industry. You need war. It's this reciprocal relationship. The sad thing about those two sides there, industry and war, is that in order for that to even happen, in order for that relationship to even work, you need a lot of dead people in between. And I think that this is an issue that we see in Revelation, that John, and by the way, the prophets of the Old Testament would talk about the violence of Babylon, say. And so this is an old problem. It's a human problem. But nonetheless, in Revelation, you do have this idea that Rome is exploiting her neighbors, exploiting people, and people are a means to the end of, her own glory. And so there are 1,000,001 ways that we can connect that to the modern world. And I encourage everybody to really think deeply about that. There's one part in my book where I basically say, how do we who live in the West, who live in the ease and the comfort of the West, particularly of those who live in the midst of empire, how do we embody the ways of the Lamb in a land full of the iconography of the beast? And I think I can't remember exactly how I put that, but that's the gist of it. And I think it's an important question to ask. Violence is the name of the game. And unfortunately, we live in a world where violence is the name of gain too. It's a terrible game of gain. And I don't even know where to begin with the critique, other than to say, come Lord Jesus. We need a better kingdom than the ones that we currently have. Right. And in terms of your second question about the violence issue with Jesus, how he rules and reigns, this is a very important question too. We tend to have this idea that God, well, we have particular views about God's wrath. I'm actually doing a paper on this later in the year at a conference because I'm looking at wrath in Revelation. And my basic thesis follows, for the most part, the thesis of Greg Boyd. I don't know if people are familiar with Greg's work. He's got a book it's a 2-volume book called The Crucifixion of the Warrior God. I highly recommend it. And Greg basically makes this thesis that God, the way God's wrath works is through nonviolence, basically through the cross, and the way that wrath happens is when God just withdraws his presence from an entity or the world, and once his presence is withdrawn, then chaos ensues. This is why all throughout Scripture you have the plea of God's people to God saying, "Cause your face to shine upon us." And in Hebrew, the word face is the word presence. It means the same thing. Let your presence be upon us, because the idea is when God's presence is upon us, we prosper. When God's presence is removed from us, when his face is turned against us, we suffer, because we need his sustaining grace. And if we say no to God continually, if we keep pushing him away and we keep wanting the ways of the beast, then God will eventually give us that what we want. If we want a life without God, he'll turn his face from us, and then the world becomes, it dives into a process of devolution and degradation, where we implode because we cannot exist without God. That's my basic understanding of how wrath works. The idea for ethicists, and this is something that Greg talks about, is that there are two ways of conceiving wrath, essentially. One is the extrinsic view, and the other is the intrinsic view. The extrinsic view means that when a crime or a sin is committed, say, that God goes off to his closet of wrath and finds some sort of wrath or thunderbolt to lodge at the people. And what you have there is that wrath is extrinsic to the nature of the crime. They have nothing inherently or ontologically to do with one another, right? The intrinsic view is much different, and I think the Bible actually supports this view. Intrinsic wrath is the idea that sin is its own punishment, that when we sin, if God lets the sin continue to grow, then the sin will grow into wrath itself, into evil, into chaos. And the only reason that we're not in that moment yet is because God has not removed his protective grace. His presence is still with us in some sense. But there is coming a time when God gives us what we want, and we'll just simply implode, because sin can't exist on its own. This is an idea that we find in Gregory of Nyssa. We find this sort of idea in Augustine, of course, that sin has no existence on its own, that it's just a parasite of the good, essentially. And the main thesis that I like, that I understand to be the biblical one, is that wrath is just, I don't see a difference fundamentally, ontologically, really, a difference between the glorious presence of, well, how do I put this? I don't see a difference between wrath and divine love. I just don't, or goodness, you might say. Wrath is just what you experience, when you're on a wrong relationship with God. Let me give an example of this. I think it's best with metaphors and examples. Let's suppose that when God shows up, think of what God is even. I mean, he's this unapproachable light. He is all good. Like, he is, just this, I don't even know how to describe what God is like. But just imagine him being this soul penetrating being of light. Okay. And when he shows up, parousia, when he shows up, the big reveal, that's going to have different effects on different people. Now, if you are a person full of darkness, that light will pierce you, it will hurt you, it'll dissolve you.
It's going to burn.
But if it's going to burn. If you are full of light, then when he shows up, you know what you have when light meets light? Unity, community, koinonia, right? Fellowship, union with God, right? And I think that's a good way to see it. It's the old metaphor of the same sun that hardens clay can melt wax. it's just how you experience. It's based on the constitution of your own heart. That's how you experience God. And whenever God, wrath is just when God, you might, these are all metaphors that I'm using, right? Because I don't think we quite understand how it all works. But the idea is that, to behold God while you remain evil is a terrible situation to be in, right? It's going to hurt in a sense. So there's different metaphors for how we can understand this. And I think that, here's the thing, we go back to the empire question. If empires are insisting on advancing themselves through means of darkness, unnecessary violence and things like that, if that's what they insist, then when God shows up with his light, the darkness will just never, it's over. It's done. The light's going to come on in the dark room and it's going to be over. And that's why I think critiquing empire is so important, is that we want to make sure that empires are held accountable and that truth is spoken to power. Right now I'm talking to you on the screen, but what you can't see is I've got a picture, and I tend to put this picture wherever I'm working. So if I'm working right here, the picture's staring me in the face. If I'm working on my desk behind me, then I take the picture and set it right by my desk, right? And it's this picture. I don't know if you can see this or not, but
yeah,
it's
the cross
of Jesus on the cross. It's kind of blurry, but yeah, and it's Jesus on the cross, and it reminds me that everything I do, it needs to be in union with what I'm seeing here, Jesus on the cross. And there's two people down at the foot of the cross and they're weeping. And really what that image reminds me of, though, is the enthronement of God himself. Now think of that. Think of that concept, that Jesus as God himself is enthroned on a cross. The way he rules and reigns is through giving of himself, which is completely opposite of what we see in the world. The way empires rule today is by not giving of themselves, but rather taking from others for the benefit of self. It's completely antithetical to what we see in Jesus. It's completely antithetical. And this brings us full circle back to Revelation. The real question, and I think every Christian needs to come to terms with this, the real question is, what team do you plan to be on? Right now, it might seem tempting to join the empires of the world. They're monstrous. They're very powerful. They can take you out in an instant, right? I mean, they've got the weapons to do it. It might make you feel like a first century Christian living in Asia. But really, we need a revelation. We need an unveiling. We need an apocalypse. Because the truth of the matter is this: that the person I'm looking at right here on this picture, the one on the cross, the slain lamb, there's going to come a day when the slain lamb stares the monster in the face. And when that happens, it's over. Not even a battle. Like the way Revelation depicts it is Jesus shows up with a sword in his mouth. It's not literal sword in his mouth. That would be weird. But what he's pointing at is that Jesus's weapon is the word. God's weapon is the word. I don't know what that means. He's going to show up and say amen, and then it's over. He's just going to show up and breathe. It's over. He's so powerful. The slain lamb is so powerful that sword of his mouth, when it's out, it vanquishes everything. It destroys everything. Everything is made new. And that's exactly how everything was made in the beginning, by the way. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word, and God creates through his Word. He'll recreate through his Word too. It's hard for us to understand this in a world currently dominated by the empires of the day, but we are told to persevere into the end, because when that does happen, we want to be on Team Jesus' side. We want to be people like that. And I'll end with saying this, just on this. Feel free to follow up with other questions, but I will say this. We can look at the empires around us and say, man, that's a mighty military, that's a mighty empire, and we can live our lives in fear or whatnot. But I'm going to tell you something way more powerful than that. And you can experience this right now today. You can experience this as you're watching this. You can experience it tomorrow. You can experience it right now. You don't have to wait. It's the self-sacrifice of Jesus. And you can embody that to your neighbor, to your family. You can embody that right now. You don't have to wait to experience this. There's something very, very powerful about love that I don't think the world is even remotely understands. And I think that this is the calling that we have, is that we overcome the beast by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And those two things go so well together. And so the call that we have as apocalyptic people is, what are we going to show the world? Are we going to reveal to the world the true way of being human? Or are we going to just be conformed to the ways of this world today? And I suggest that we all conform to the ways of the Lamb. It looks weak. It looks very difficult. Indeed, it is difficult to take up your cross. But I guarantee you one thing. I don't care if you live to your 90 or you're martyred at age 30. If you live like the way of the Lamb, if you embody the crucified Lamb in your world today, you're going to turn the world upside down. You can take that to the bank. It's going to happen, but it's your choice how you're going to live.
Wow. I love the way that you put that, and it puts such a nice, neat bow on understanding the book of Revelation in context as a critique of empire that allows us as followers of Jesus in the 20s, in our day and age, following Jesus here in America, to have a critique of America as well as we live here as faithful followers of Jesus. Because if we just leave Revelation as something that's going to happen way in the future or disconnected from the actual narrative, we don't have that critique of empire. And what you just did was so beautiful in doing that.
God is not in favor of coercive, abusive power exercised by people over other people, and he's not in favor of it because ultimately, when it is evil and coercive and abusive, ultimately, the ones driving the bus aren't necessarily the human power brokers, because behind the human power brokers, there's a more sinister intelligence that wants to destroy, that wants to enslave, that wants you to worship them. This is why the nations, both in Psalm 82, Revelation, and lots of other passages. I mean, there's tons of passages like this in the Old Testament. This is why the nations are described this way, and why the gods of those nations get looped into it. It's all one huge, chaotic, evil system that is aligned against, ultimately, the people of God. So, why, again, let's go back to the why question. This is what I think it's really about, because where's all this leading? Chapters 15, 16, 17, 18. Well, 19, we're going to get, we're going to get Armageddon. We're going to get the return of the Lord. We're going to get the day of the Lord, enacted. We're going to get all this evil. We're going to get the beast dealt with. Now think of it this way. If this is really about God against the nations, if this is really about the Psalm 82 judgment of the gods, the death of the gods finally coming to pass, think about the purpose of that. Think about the purpose of that. Revelation 17 is an integral part of the day of the Lord judgment of the gods and the reclaiming of the earth. Why? For the re-inheritance of the Messiah. The earth is going to be wiped clean of chaos. The earth is being readied again to be sacred space for the true God and the King.
God was reversing the judgment at Babel. Part of that judgment had been the confusion of languages to divide nations. The Spirit was supernaturally overcoming that obstacle. But there's more going on. Pentecost was a slap in the face to the gods of the nations. Their authority had been nullified. God was going to take the nations back. God gave the risen Jesus all the authority he had once given to them. This is why the Great Commission begins the way it does.
All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all the nations.
The nations listed in Acts 2 cover all of the geography associated with the disinherited nations from Babel. Pentecost sent the message that God was reclaiming those nations. They could once again be included in his family.
Paul lists rulers and principalities, authorities, powers, dominions, lords, and thrones. All of these terms indicate geographical rulership. They reflect how the Old Testament depicts the relationship of the unseen and the seen worlds. Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles. He knew that he was up against the old gods of the nations, allotted to people excluded from God's family back at Babel.
Paul says something in the book of Romans that helps us see that what happened at Babel influenced the way he thought about his mission.
Therefore, after I have accomplished this and sealed this fruit for delivery to them, I will depart by way of you for Spain.
Why did Paul care about getting to Spain? On the one hand, some think it's the only disinherited nation not mentioned in the book of Acts, the land of Tarshish. Clement, the early church father from the end of the 1st century AD, says that Paul went to the limits of the West in order to reach the full scope of Gentiles in the Roman Empire.
Having taught righteousness to the whole world and having come to the limits of the West.
In other words, Jonah went to Tarshish to get away from proclaiming to Gentiles in Nineveh. Paul went to Spain to reach the Gentiles at the end of the earth, called the Roman Empire.
Paul had a supernatural view of his own life. He viewed himself as set apart, as an instrument for God's use. We have the same task of invading the demonic strongholds of this world with the message of the love of Jesus Christ.
That is ultimately what this is about. The earth must be made fit. Okay? It must be made fit for the reoccupation of the true king in a new Eden with his own family and his reconstituted council going back to Eden, and that's us. So again, we need to pay attention to the theological backdrop behind all of these sorts of descriptions. It's not about who has the best weaponry. It's not about who has the best army. It's ultimately about the gods getting what they deserve, the beast getting what it deserves. It's about the annihilation of chaos. Chaos must be annihilated. It must be eliminated in totality. Because this time, when the Lord returns, chapter 19, okay, he's going to be occupying a new Eden. And in this case, the new Eden is global. The whole world, every nation, every square inch of the place has to be readied and retooled, refit to be sacred space because he is showing up. Okay, he is reoccupying. So again, we need to think a little bit bigger picture about these things. I know they look strange, they look disparate, they look like they're not related. They're all related. They all fit together. Again, if you can take the bird's eye view and look down and look where John is drawing all this stuff, and the key here is the Babylon. The key here is the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. And then the imagery makes sense, and the end game makes sense. The ultimate conflict, as the players are taking sides, they make sense.
Are we living in the end times? What is the mark of the beast? And who is the Antichrist? Is the rapture biblical or something our Western world invented? Make sure to check out this full interview as we go over Revelation and the end of the world as you know it. This interview will bring the hope of the gospel and a biblical understanding of the end times. Stay tuned. The beginning is near.